Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I want to welcome you back again to this channel. I had promised to be able to come to you as frequently as possible. I am Professor Silas Odongo, and my channel is Professor Silas Odongo's Knowledge Hub. Today, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to talk to you about climate change research, and specifically modern research methods in climate change. The reason why I want to talk about this is because science and research are probably two most credible sources of information, particularly for climate change. And through them, you are able to get facts and get knowledge that you use to influence policies and decisions at every level. Climate change, as we know it, has metamorphosed from biophysical matter to also a socioeconomic matter. And because of this, we actually use a lot of methodology or even response strategies. Take, for example, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, which are largely socioeconomic responses. And then we also have the biophysical approaches and biophysical methods of mitigations. So I want to talk about this, and my main aim is to be able to present this and to tell you that research aims at understanding quite a number of things with regard to climate. And being biophysical and socioeconomic, we rely on data, and that data is the one that normally we use to influence the changes that we talk about. So when climate change is said to be both biophysical and socioeconomic, it then implies that for you to get that credible data, both biophysical and socioeconomic lenses are supposed to be deployed so that you have a comprehensive inquiry or you get comprehensive information regarding it. And normally what happens is researchers therefore interact with a wide range of biophysical and socioeconomic information as they engage in what they're doing. And why is this the case? We know very well that initially people studied climate change through the biophysical means. Take, for example, the environmentalists, geographers, and meteorologists. Imagine how they have been able to work around this. For them, climate change has been and continues to be a physical matter. But things have changed because climate is operating at the universe level. And within the universe, which is a system, there are a set of interacting subsystems. And these subsystems are different, and some are biophysical, some are socioeconomic. The more reason why we have to look at a more comprehensive approach. Now, this thinking led to the use of those two approaches to studying climate and climate change. And you can imagine, so what aspects of climate change do we study using socioeconomic, and what aspects do we study using biophysical? Look at the socio-demographic factors, even the psychographic factors, which cause the differentials that we see in climate impacts, for example. Look at community vulnerability to climate change. Look at knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs, and even behaviors of people with regard to climate change and variability. Look at, for example, disasters, risks, and even conflicts. Look at population and migration, and even displacement. The way these socioeconomic factors, if you were to use entirely biophysical, you might lose them. Look at even the socioeconomic stressors of climate change, the livelihood, look at them. Look at the economics of climate change and variability, the cost implications. Look at mitigation and adaptation measures that are happening at community level or at certain scales. Look at, for example, the variables which are socioeconomic, which affect mitigation and adaptation, as it were. And even the policies and legislations that we normally use to check climate change. And people even go ahead to look at even how to mainstream climate change into various development plans for actions. And then that then calls for another methodology other than the biophysical to be able to do this. Look at sector-specific responses or sector-specific impacts of climate change. So those ones, you can easily study them using the socioeconomic methodology as opposed to, for example, the biophysical. But then look at the aspects of climate change that you can study using the biophysical, like look at the data, biophysical climate data, which we collect using scientific instruments, for example. Go to a typical weather station and see what happens there, that kind of data. Look at the parameters that we normally use to run trends and even projections. What tells us the situation that was there in the past and how it's likely to materialize in the future, for example. Look at the biophysical, chemical properties of the natural world, because the natural world is also made up of those biological, physical, and chemical properties. Look at the soil, water, and the changes in those parameters, like temperature, precipitation, humidity, pressure, and all that. Look at all of them, even moisture. Look at wildlife, those that are living in terrestrial environment and those that are living in aquatic ecosystems. Look at the plants, the vegetations. Look at even the soils and water tables. Look at acidity and alkalinity issues. Look at atmospheric gases and even substances that deplete the ozone layer that we talk about. So all these are able to be studied using biophysical methodology. Now then, when we have those two sets of beliefs that we study climate change better using both socioeconomic and biophysical, then we begin to look at, so then what modern method is available for scholars and researchers and scientists to be able to exhaustively study climate change? Then I look at this by giving spotlight on the origins of the modern methods that we use at the moment. I have been able to indicate previously that early science that was used to study and quite a great deal of things borrowed greatly for the natural science. I talk about natural science even though I am aware that even before the coming of that school of thought, we still had ways of studying and constituting knowledge. Look at the tradition of things. But when we had the natural science paradigm, we actually believed that knowledge, as it were, existed outside there. And so it was only amenable for common senses of safe touch, hearing, sight, smell, and taste. And then we went up to believe that if you want to constitute a believable science or believable research, then you could simply do it through making reference to the principle and methodologies of naturalism or positivism or even of objectivism, as it were. So then if you wanted to make statement of the existence of knowledge, then you probably just relied on scientific pursuits that are natural science in nature as the major paradigm. But then if you use the natural science, then you think about knowledge resulting from testing and pre-testing. Remember falsification that we have talked about before. That any knowledge worth mentioning where people are is supposed to be grounded on statements of knowledge that can be verified and tested. That was the general principle that operated the natural science and positivism. And you see, natural science dominated a great deal of our academic and scholastic space for a long time, the 17th century, 18th century, and even 19th century. So we used to have all this. But then even this one was actually even supported by even scholars who themselves were not part of the natural science, as it were. Look, for example, at Auguste Comte, the one who was the father of positivism and sociology. He said that even when we are aware that there are emerging science, emerging areas of knowledge or disciplines, studying them or making claims to knowledge must be driven by principles of natural science, as it were. So even these areas like sociology are still run or were supposed to be run on the principle of natural science. Remember, at that time of Comte, social science was rapidly growing and rapidly coming, but it had to be checked at a certain level through the principles of natural science. Otherwise, if any science was claiming so but did not use those principles, it was thought to be able to die because of a lack of objectivity. So Comte even ended up believing that universal laws exist for everything, including human actions, including human behavior, and even thinking. And so if you make any claims of human activity being studied outside that scope, you would say you can't survive. That's what the thinking was around. And of course, this is why many scholars, many scientists, even now as we talk, still believe that if you are studying real science, or if you are committing yourself to knowledge that is real, then it has to be hinged on natural science and positivism. And they may not hear anything about any other science other than empiricism, objectivity, and naturalism. And so the general principle on how they operate is controlling everything. They control the theories. They even control the methods that you are using, even before you commission and before you start the research. Even the research structure and even the process are normally constrained using those principles. They're from natural science and positivism. And so if you look at it like even other scholars, look at even as late as 1950s, look at, for example, the work of Karl Popper. Karl Popper is the one who introduced the idea of falsifiability, if you can imagine. He says that any science, what it solves must be falsifiable. So the intent of scholars who study after you may be, to a large extent, just finding faults with you. Is the knowledge that you have generated testable? If somebody was to do this, will they get the same results as the one that you got? But this did not work well with some other emerging scholars. For example, in the 90s, we had a scholar called Feyerabend who criticized the hard stance of naturalism and the positivism. He specifically did criticize Karl Popper by indicating that knowledge cannot be static as to be able to only understood in the confines of natural science and positivism. He, for example, at that time even mentioned Thomas Kuhn's. Many of us are aware about Thomas Kuhn, the one who came up with the book and the thinking around evolution of modern science. Kuhn himself acknowledged that science and knowledge isn't static. Real science and real knowledge is a product of incremental growth, and especially through what he called the several paradigms. So he came up with the knowledge paradigms. He observed that the knowledge in a given area, like climate change, for example, is probably a product of a lot of other sources of knowledge, like indigenous knowledge. Who doesn't know about indigenous thinking, particularly even with regard to climate change? Look at lay knowledge, agrarian knowledge, for example. We still think about indigenous or lay knowledge as a source of information. Then look at the religious knowledge and beliefs, the cosmic thinking. So the cosmic thinking is also a source of information, a source of knowledge. And then we have the Western civilization, Western thinking and philosophy. If you look at that, look at people like Isaac Newton and the philosophies that revolutionized scholarship. Then came the natural science that we are describing, which actually took center stage of academy. And then the rise of positivism, people like Auguste Comte. And then later we saw the coming of social science subject. Even social science, when it came, it was still being confined within the dictum of natural and positivism. Say, for example, qualitative research. We however, had to bring in the qualitative social science studies. Many people have not thought like qualitative methods is anything worth the study of by any meaningful scholar, for example. But at the moment we're talking about integration of many methodologies, what we call the modern science. We think about integrative science, we think about multidisciplinarity, we think about the transdisciplinarity and many things that now. So from the 19th centuries onward, up to the moment, people go for modern science. And they say that social and behavioral science is actually supposed to be studied through those approaches. You can imagine that. But it was later realized that if you were to deploy this methodology of natural science and positivism alone, there are a lot of things that you left out that these two methodologies left out certain gaps that defined a lack of conclusivity with regard to many issues of knowledge. So then that's why we brought in qualitative to plug in the gap. That's why now we say a more comprehensive study is that which is as integrative as possible, using maybe mixed methods, using multidisciplinarity, and even at the moment we bring in transdisciplinarity. So you can imagine all that. So then it then follows that we are thinking about a number of methodologies and how these methodologies have been able to grow with time until what we will be describing as modern science. For this particular presentation I'm giving you, I'll be able to take you through the socioeconomic methods. I will just get you through quantitative methods, qualitative methods, mixed methods, triangulation, and then I'll go to biophysical methods, and then I go to transdisciplinarity. And this is going to be important in elucidating a number of issues, a number of approaches that people have used with regard to us studying climate change in a very comprehensive manner that makes us, or that proves that climate change is indeed both biophysical and socioeconomic thing. Please don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel, because I have so many more exciting and educating sessions, but only through Professor Silas Odongo's Knowledge Hub. Welcome. Thank you.